So let's start. Okay, so this part of the course, I'm going to tell you a little bit what is the role of neutrinos in astrophysics, in cosmology, and this evolution, and this some results on about the neutrino mass searches at experiments. Okay, so you remember we saw this picture where we were discussing the different sources for the neutrinos. I was telling you that most of them we have already found, but so far I've not discussed really these three sources. So astrophysical, that are essential supernova and accelerators, and these neutrinos coming from cosmological, from the cosmos, okay? So first I will start discussing, I will enter with the neutrinos in astrophysics, discussing first the supernova. Okay, I guess all of you have studied some courses on astrophysics, maybe star evolution. So you know that the evolution of the life of a star is determined by its mass. So depending on its mass, it could follow this path, okay? That it seems that is the path that is going to follow our sun. Or in the case of more massive stars, above 8 solar masses, then the path is different because the mass will be so large that once the fuel has finished, the pressure of radiation is not going to sustain the gravitational force, and then it will collapse, producing a core collapse supernova. And then from the core collapse supernova, also depending on the mass, it could create different objects like neutron stars or black holes. So in principle, neutrinos are important in this path because neutrinos are emitted in core collapse supernova. So we will focus on this part. So what's going on there? So let's see this. We have a star that ends its life because it has already fuel all the elements up to iron. Then iron is not energetically favorable to continue burning. So then there is no radiation pressure because there are no nuclear reactions inside. So then the collapse is produced. Okay, but then once the nuclear density is achieved, there is a bounce. And then at the end, but it is very much complicated. Still, it is not well understood in simulations how the bounce and how the explosion takes place. But what happens is that it forms a protoneutron star, and then in this place there is a cooling, and there is an emission of neutrinos in several phases. Okay, so there are many in this process of the core collapse, and afterwards the cooling of the protoneutron star. There is a huge emission of low energy neutrinos with energies around MeV in a very short time, and the luminosity that can achieve this kind of events in neutrinos is 3 times 10 to the 19 times that of the sun. So I told you that the sun is the most powerful source of neutrinos close to us, but this is greatly superated by supernova. Okay. And then according to some astrophysical estimations, so it is expected that a few core collapse supernova will happen in our galaxy per century. So there is a chance that we can see it. Okay. So this is like the different phases for the neutrino emission in the core collapse supernova. So first of all, there is produced the neutrino burst. That is a very short time emission of electron neutrinos. And these electron neutrinos are produced in the electron capture processes. So once the neutron star is producing, so electrons and protons are combined to form neutrons, the neutrons that would form the protoneutron star, and then electron neutrinos are emitted. So this is the first phase. Then there is an accretion phase where the outer core of the protoneutron star accretes material onto the inner regions. And as a consequence of this accretion of material, the gravitational energy is released as thermal neutrinos. In that phase, one can expect this kind of a spectrum. So this will be the spectrum for electron neutrinos and antineutrinos, and the spectrum will be different for the other two flavors, for mu and nu tau. Okay? And then the last phase, that is the one taking longer, is the cooling of the object, of the protoneutron star, that it essentially happens like a black body a cooling, okay, of the protoneutron star doing this emission on thermal neutrinos, where neutrinos of all flavors are emitted. So this is essentially the summary on what we're interested on for a core collapse supernova. So the neutrinos are emitted in that way, okay? So here you have together all the phases together. You have, before we had it just separately, now I put here all the lines together, and then you will expect these larger flux for electron neutrinos correspond to the neutrino burst, and then these other two phases that combine to get this spectrum for antinui and for the muon and tau neutrinos. Okay, this is essentially what you expect, the neutrinos you expect to measure from a core collapse supernova. Okay, what about the energy? So this is this generalized spectrum of neutrinos. So the energy of the supernovas will be around here, around a few MeV. And there is this line because we already have seen neutrinos from a core collapse supernova. In particular, in 1987, it was the observed explosion of the so-called 1987A supernova. So this is these pictures are corresponding to this event. So in principle, it happened in the Large Magellanic Cloud at a distance of 50 kiloparsec in the Tarantula Nebula. So you can see there is an arrow pointing to a point where there is no especially nothing. So this star here is called Sanduleak 69202. So you see, it was not very relevant star. But suddenly, one day, in February in 1997, this point just suddenly just start brightening a lot with the same bright as the whole galaxy. And then this was because of the explosion of this supernova. So it was 23rd of February of 1997. So as a result of this explosion, of course, it is the first observation of neutrinos coming from a star different from our sun, and it was detected a number of 24 neutrinos in 3 different experiments. I will show you later. 11 in Kamiokande. You have listened already several times about Kamiokande. The nice thing about this is that it was really a good chance. They were very lucky because the Kamiokande experiment was just starting. They were like doing some tests. And after 1 week, after some days that they were testing, the supernova exploded and they could get the events. So for this observation, the head of the lab in Kamiokande, Masatoshi Koshiba, got the Nobel Prize of Physics in 2002. Okay, so this is with this supernova, only 24 neutrinos were recorded in the Earth. However, if now a supernova will explode in our galaxy, things will be much different because there are so many neutrino experiments nowadays that one will be able to measure in Super Kamiokande about 10,000 neutrinos. So you can see, because the experiment is much larger with respect to Kamiokande, but also because the techniques have improved a lot. Okay, so this is the summary of the events detected. So in Kamiokande, actually it was Kamiokande 2 because it was the second phase of Kamiokande. 11 neutrinos were recorded. So this is the energy of the neutrinos versus the time after the first event. In the IMB experiment, Irvine, Michigan, Brookhaven in the USA, they detected 8 neutrinos. And in Bakshan, in the former Russia, former Soviet Republic, they detected 5 neutrinos. And the point is that they detected simultaneously the signals at the 3 experiments. Okay? So you may think that 24 neutrinos is very few, but it's what we had so far. But it was possible to extract a lot of information on these 24 events. And for instance, it was possible to confirm some theoretical supernova models. So it was possible to confirm that supernova explosions emit neutrinos. You may imagine this is very basic, but okay, there was no proof. And then they measured that that as expected, neutrinos are emitted. Also, it was a proof about the large luminosity that one can expect in supernova. So about the average energy, that the average energy measured was around 10 MeV, as models say. And also about the duration. The duration of the explosion, it was right to assume that the three phases were about 10 seconds. But not only that, it was possible to extract new information about neutrinos. So first, there's information about supernova models, but also some information about neutrinos. So it was possible to determine, to put a limit on the neutrino mass. So taking into account that it was traveling from the Corcola supernova to the Earth, and the speed was not the speed of light. So with this data, it was possible to infer a bound on the mass of the neutrino. Also that the gravitational interactions of neutrinos agrees with general relativity. Also, it was possible to put some constraints on exotic properties, such as the neutrino magnetic moment we discussed this morning. Okay, because if neutrino magnetic moment was larger than some value, some effect would have been seen in the supernova, or even to put some bounds on the participation of other particles in the processes, like actions. So at the end, I think a lot of information was extracted from these only 2024 events. Okay, how's the situation now? So nowadays, there are many, many detectors that would be able to measure supernova neutrinos. Of course, all of these experiments are not dedicated to supernova, only to supernova. But they are dedicated to other things. For instance, NOVA is an accelerator long wavelength experiment, or MicroBoon is the one designed to check for this LSND anomaly, but they are there, and if they have supernova explodes and neutrinos arrive, they will be able to measure the neutrinos. So you can see the large network of neutrinos all around the world that might be able to measure the supernova neutrinos. So there, in brackets, you have the number of events one can expect in each of these experiments for a supernova, for a model supernova that will explode at a distance of 10 kiloparsecs. So few thousand in Super Kamiokande, few thousand in NOVA, so this 24 is not going to happen anymore. There will be much, much more number of events, and then much more physics could be done with all these neutrinos. And indeed, this large network of experiments just that are able to detect neutrinos have been organized somehow within this SNEWS network. And the purpose of this network of supernova neutrinos, as you can see here, they are not all the possible detectors that may detect supernovas, but some of them. And then the idea is that they have like a network called Supernova Early Warning System. And the idea of these experiments is try to be prepared for if neutrinos arrive, to establish some protocol to see if they get the signal simultaneously in agreement. And most of all, the idea is once they detect neutrinos, to send the alert to the other experiments, to the optical telescopes, in order to measure, to see the explosion. Because given the models of supernova, we know that the neutrinos will arrive to the Earth before the photons. Okay? So then, usually it depends on the model, it depends on the mass, but perhaps a few hours before the light, neutrinos will arrive. So then the idea is that with these neutrinos, one can see that a supernova is happening, send the alert to the telescopes in such a way that they can point to the event and watch the explosion from the beginning. Okay? And so this is more or less some of the experiments that participate in this supernova early warning system. So they use different techniques because some of them use water Cherenkov, some of them use liquid scintillator, other liquid novel dark matter, low background, even LED, okay? And the thing is that this system is already working since 2005. It's already operative, and now they are preparing this scheme here is for the SNEWS version 1. Now we are moving to the SNEWS 2.0, where they are going to include 15 experiments in the network, okay, in order to collaborate for this purpose of testing early alerts for other experiments, okay? So here you see at least the explanation, because here you have the emission of a core collapse supernova, and in principle you have the emission in neutrinos, in gravitational waves, and also in electromagnetic. So given that the neutrino signal, so this is the time after the collapse, so then given that neutrinos will arrive before, then this will be taken to you, the alert will be sent to, for instance, gravitational wave experiments, and the alert will be sent to electromagnetic counterparts experiments to watch this signal. Okay? Because in principle, a nearby supernova will produce the three messengers: neutrinos, gravitational waves, and electromagnetic radiation. Okay. So why is important to have many experiments participating in the warning system? Because we need several of them in order to triangulate the signal and to point out the position of the supernova in the sky. So here they have prepared like a very similar, very simple cartoon in order to see how this triangulation works. So for instance here, and they consider to have observed the signal at the Shannon experiment, Kamlan, and Microboon. And then with these three experiments, so they will be able to identify, at some extent, the origin of the supernova. And then they will have like two different possibilities for the origin of the supernova. But then, if for instance they include, in addition, nova or ice cube, so adding more detectors located at different places, then it's able to point out very precisely to the position, to the origin of the supernova. So this is how it's so powerful having many detectors connected. So if you're interested, they have also, I don't know if you have heard before about that, but they have even an application for smartphones. I have it in mind. So you can just download it. And in principle, you will be there registered. And if there is an alert, you will receive it in your smartphone. So you can sign up there. I mean, you just need to download it. And then they send some test coincidence. It's interesting. Okay. So we have seen the information one can learn and the detection of supernova, but there are some other neutrinos coming from supernovas, but not from a particular core collapse, but from all the core collapse supernovas that have exploded in the history. These are called, is the background from all supernova, and it is what it is called supernova relic neutrinos, supernova relic background. Because indeed, supernovas have been happening during the history of the universe, and then all the neutrinos emitted in those explosions are in the universe. So then if one assumes that in the universe there are 10 to the 9 galaxies with 10 to the 9 stars each, and then that about 0.3% might produce a supernova. So it is, you do the numbers and you can estimate that approximately 10 to the 17 supernovas might have been have occurred since the Big Bang. And that's a lot. That's a lot of supernovas and of course a lot of neutrinos. This relic background has not been detected yet because there is a large background on top of that. In the case of a burst, it's just a signal that appears from nothing, but for the supernova relic, I mean, this is like a bath of neutrinos. It is not so easy to measure it. But it is very important to study it because it will also help to understand the general characteristic of a supernova explosion and the evolution of the universe as well. So there is also a lot of effort trying to measure and to understand the properties of this supernova relic neutrino background. So here there is a prediction of the flux one can expect for these supernova relic neutrinos as a function of the energy. And according to these fluxes, one can expect this number of neutrinos, for instance, in Super Kamiokande. So depending on the energy range one considers, you see that the event rate is not that large. It's between less than 1 and 5 events, okay? So this is why it's so difficult to measure it, okay? The thing is that people know this is so difficult, but there is effort trying to detect it. And then very recently in the supernova, in the Super Kamiokande experiment, there was a modification trying to improve the sensitivity to the detection of supernova relic neutrinos. What they did is dissolving gadolinium in the 50 kiloton water Cherenkov tank of Super Kamiokande with the idea of improving the neutron detection efficiency, because the detection happens through inverse beta decay. Remember, inverse beta decay corresponds to electron antineutrino interacting in the detector with a proton, produce positron and neutron. Okay? And then sometimes the efficiency capturing the neutron is not that good. But if you manage to improve your efficiency capturing the neutron, then you enhance your sensitivity to this kind of process. And this can be done adding gadolinium. Gadolinium is also added to the reactor experiments, and now it is also in the liquid, in the water sharing tank of Super Kamiokande. So this is how they are trying to improve the technique. And also, if you check here in this graph, you have this band, this band here. It corresponds to the supernova relic neutrino spectrum. And you see that for lower energies, there is a large background from reactors. So it's a huge background from reactors. At higher energy, there is a background from atmospheric neutrinos. So then the idea is to exploit, I try to look into this hole where there is less background, is trying to look there for the supernova relic neutrino background. So this is the current status of these searches in Super Kamiokande. So now we have seen supernova. Now let's move to the neutrinos coming from astrophysical sources. Okay, so here it's important to notice that neutrinos are a particle that is very useful to do astronomy. I mean, up to some time ago, astronomy was essentially done with photons, with optical telescopes, but also gamma rays, X-rays, and later on also with cosmic rays, which just particles. But with neutrinos, we had another tool to look to the universe. And it has many advantages over the other particles. So for instance, one is that it is electrically neutral particle. And being electrically neutral particle means that its path is not deviated in the interstellar medium by magnetic fields. Contrary what happens with cosmic rays. We have protons, we have charged particles. When they travel from the source to the Earth, they could be deviated due to the magnetic fields. And then this is important because we cannot reconstruct the source, because if the path has been deviated in the middle, if I see a proton coming from there, I'm not sure the source is there. But if I see a neutrino coming from there, I know the source is in a straight line there. So this is one positive point in favor of neutrinos, and also that they are very weakly interacting. Since they are very weak interacting, they are essentially not absorbed by any dust or other material in the galaxy. That this is what happens with photons. Photons get absorbed in the universe, and then sometimes we don't get enough photons. If there is a cloud of dust in between the source or the Earth, but in the case of neutrinos, this does not happen. So they don't deviate, and then are not absorbed. So these are really good points in favor of the neutrino astronomy. However, as you know, what happens with the neutrinos, they are difficult to detect, okay, because the cross sections are very small. So we have good things and bad things about neutrinos. Okay, so still they are hard to detect, but they are not impossible to detect. IceCube experiment in the South Pole, I discussed a little bit on that on Monday, have detected a lot of astrophysical neutrinos, but here I'm just highlighting some of the most important events they had. In 2013, IceCube reported the detection of very high energy neutrinos for the first time. So they reported the detection of these two events with 1 peta-electron volt, PeV. 1 PeV, it has 1 × 10⁻⁵ electron volts. So I'm putting this picture here because they put a name to the events. So usually at the experiments, you don't put a name, this is a number. So for instance, you have the supernova, you have SN 97A, because it was the first supernova, and the only one, in 87. But there, it was like so amazing to have neutrinos of that energy that they put even a name to them. And they put this name, Ernie and Bert, to these two neutrinos. So sometime after, in September of 2014, they detected even a more energetic neutrino with 2 PeV, and they put this name, Big Bird, also from this Sesame Street I don't know if you know them. Okay. So these were like very special events, but then after that, they have detected few like that. And even though it was reported later, it was detected in November 2013, and they reported, they report these 26 neutrinos with energies between 30 and 1,200 TeV. So high energy neutrinos have been detected in IceCube. Here you have a simulation, an image, because you remember the IceCube is located in the ice of the South Pole, and they have these strings where they detect the light, and then they prepare, the IceCube collaboration prepared this slide for the Neutrino 2020 conference that it was supposed to be organized in Chicago, but due to COVID, it was organized in our house. But still, the talk was given by this spokesperson, Francis Halsen, and then he prepared a comparison between the Chicago city and the size of the event detected in IceCube. So this is the signal corresponding to an electron neutrino of 2 peta-electron volts. A neutrino of 2 peta-electron volts will form in the detector, in the ice, a signal of this size, as a very large fraction of the Chicago city. So that's just to imagine how large are these events. Okay, so far we have discussed the detection of high energy neutrinos, but then in 2017, IceCube reported another very interesting result. Here, they reported the measurement of a high energy neutrino in coincidence with a gamma ray burst from a blazar. Okay, they measure the neutrino, then they talk to the experiments searching for gamma rays, to the gamma ray telescopes, and they found that there was a simultaneous signal in the two sources, in neutrinos and in gamma rays. So here there is 2 plots. This is for the MAGIC experiment, and this is for the Fermi experiments. And then you see that this is the signal reported by these gamma ray experiments, and the lines correspond, this is the position in the sky, and the lines correspond to the position measured by IceCube. So you can see they coincide. So the lines are the position indicated by the neutrino, and here the brightest points are the direction pointed out by these gamma rays. So this might be not so important, but it is really very important because it is the first identification of the source of a high energy neutrino. Because since it was detected in coincidence, it was possible to point the neutrino that it was coming from this source, from this blazar, that it was a known blazar that was emitting in the gamma rays. So for the first time, it was identified the source of a neutrino, of a high energy neutrino coming from one of these accelerators, okay? And then this opened the possibility, the first door, let's say, to the multi-messenger astronomy. The multi-messenger astronomy is essentially detecting objects with different tools, with different particles. So this is the first event of multi-messenger astronomy, because this event was detected in neutrinos and in gamma rays. But it was not the first one. We will discuss, okay, this is, first of all, they found the signal in neutrinos. So this corresponds to this blazar event. You see, in IceCube collaboration, they prepare very nice cartoons for the outreach. I like this one. So this corresponds to this event for the blazar. So in September, they found the neutrinos in IceCube. Then, talking with the people from X-ray gamma rays, they found it also the signal. But afterwards, the signal was also found in the optical range and also in radio waves. So at the end, this multi-wavelength observation was very, very wide with particles from many, many different places, many, many different energies. Okay, but as I was telling you, was the first event for the multi-messenger astronomy, but was not the last one. And again, in 2017, even though it was August, so it was previous to the other event, but it was reported later because things, you see, people need to analyze data. So here it was announced that on that day, in August 2017, it was detected in coincidence a signal from gravitational waves, gamma rays, and visible light. okay? And they were coming from the binary neutron star merger. So there was a system of a binary system of neutron stars that were merging. Then the signal was measured in LIGO, Virgo, and also the emission there was reported in Fermi and integral in another experiments with visible light. Neutrinos were also searched for, but no luck. I mean, no, it's very hard to detect it. So they prepare, all the collaborations together prepare this article. IceCube collaboration participated there. I think ChemTreeNet also, but they were not able to find a signal, a corresponding signal in the neutrino space only. But it's already an improvement. So you see gravitational waves, gamma rays, and visible light. Okay, another very interesting result of IceCube was to identify one galaxy as the source for 80 high-energy neutrinos. So far, it was identified, the Blazar, as the source of one very high-energy neutrino. But then in 2022, IceCube reported that they have identified this galaxy, NGC 1016, as the source of 80 high-energy neutrinos. So they were able to reconstruct the direction of the arrival of the neutrinos, and then they found there that this point corresponded to this galaxy. Another very interesting result in June 2023 was the first neutrinography of our Milky Way. So this is like a picture of the Milky Way, of the center of the Milky Way in neutrinos. So this was reported in this paper here by the IceCube collaboration. And then what they did here to be sure that it was the neutrino coming from the galactic plane. So this is the image in the optical range from the galactic plane. So this is the image in gamma rays of our galactic plane. And from this image of the gamma rays, what they did was to predict the spectrum of the pions that would be in connection with these gamma rays. Okay, so if you have this picture of the plane with gamma rays, one would expect this spectrum of pions. If you have this spectrum of pions, you will expect this concentration of neutrinos. So these are real images. These are simulations. So they extrapolate from the gamma rays, they extrapolate the neutrino expectations in the galactic plane. That is the one here. And then this is the measurement. This is what they observed. And as you can see, at very good accuracy, it corresponds, the structure they predicted correspond to what they measured. Okay? So then, as I tell you, this is like the first photo. Yes? Is what, sorry? If there is a... There is no signal. I don't know if I understand what you mean. Yes. There was no signal with neutrinos so far. So the signal was with photons and with gravitational waves, but not with neutrinos. Yeah, in principle, it would be weaker, and then so far, there has been no luck on finding this. Okay, so this is what we have until this week. But I don't know, some of you already asked me that some weeks ago there was an announcement that ChemTreeNet collaboration because they reported the detection on a ultra-high energy cosmic neutrinos. Okay, so if we remember with IceCube we were talking about 126 PeV neutrino, but on February, the result was announced on February 2025, but it was recorded in February 2023. It took 2 years to find it and to analyze it. So even though it was announced 2 weeks ago, the event is from February 2023. Okay, so then, and the nice thing is that by then they had only 10% of the detector installed. So it is this ARCA ChemTreeNet detector I told you on Monday. They will have like 230 lines in the bottom of the Mediterranean at 3.5 kilometers of depth in front of Sicily. So then when they got the signal, they had only 10% of the detector. So you can imagine the potential they could achieve when we will have the detector complete. So then this is a simulation. Let me check if it works. Because they have prepared a lot of material, very nice material, of course, Eiffel Tower for comparison. And then you see the neutrino and how the neutrino illuminates all the different photomultipliers in the strings. Okay? So this was a very, very energetic neutrino. And you can see there how many photomultipliers were illuminated. Okay? So let me show you, because there is a group in Valencia working on the ChemTreeNet, and then this guy, Agustín Sánchez Losa, has prepared, you remember this slide I showed you with the event over Chicago? So he has prepared the event over Valencia. So this is this event of ChemTreeNet over the city of Valencia, just to compare the size of the event. So the thing is that the energy they reported for this event is around 200 PeV. Okay, the error bars of the energy are very large, but it is like 2 orders of magnitude over the energies observed in IceCube. Okay, it's a very, very large energy. So here you have this is the point corresponding to this observation. So this time they were not very creative. So the name of the event is CHEM3 230213A. Just the date, so no name, no. Then this is the event. These are all the other events reported by IceCube. And the thing is that here there are the limits. So in principle, IceCube and Auger were looking also for such events, but haven't found anything. So then with this measurement, they were excluding, to some degree of significance, they were excluding this region of the parameter space because they haven't seen anything. But the event is more or less there. So it seems they claim it is like a statistical fluctuation that perhaps IceCube or Auger were not lucky enough to observe it, but they were. The origin, what about the origin? So it is still not clear. I mean, this is only one event. It is not clear if neutrino comes from a powerful cosmic accelerator, could be, from an AGN. And what they have done is to present this map where they have identified in a radius of 3 degrees around this point, have tried to identify possible blazars. And here, so this star will be the position of the event, and they have identified like 12 blazars around this area. So in principle, maybe one of them could be the origin. Still, they're going to improve the determination of the direction to see if this helps. But another possibility is that this neutrino is a cosmogenic neutrino produced from the interaction between the protons, cosmic rays, with photons of the CMB. So these are expected, the so-called cosmogenic neutrinos. And according to the estimations, in that case, okay, for the blazars, one might expect one event in 16 years, according to the bounds from IceCube and Auger. So they were lucky, this is the case, but here they were even more lucky if it's a cosmogenic neutrino, because according to the predictions, one would expect in that case one event every 70 years. So, okay. So now let's move to the cosmological neutrinos from the early universe. So in all the cases here we have a tick because we have observed directly. In the case of neutrinos from the early universe, we have only indirect evidence. There is no direct evidence for the measurement of such neutrinos. Okay? So if you study the evolution, the history of the universe, there are several epochs. I mean, you have the Big Bang, the inflation that you have learned a lot this week about inflation. And then there are different periods depending on the temperature, how the universe is cooling. So you have the formation of the hadrons, formation of the nuclei, formation of the atomos. But what's the role of neutrinos in the history of the universe? So, oops. Okay, so in principle, neutrinos, up to some point, up to temperature of the order of MeV, were coupled by weak interactions to the other particles, okay? Then after some point here, they participate also in the primordial nucleosynthesis. After one MeV around, neutrinos decoupled from the other particles, and then once they decouple, the cosmic neutrino background was emitted. So you know we have this cosmic microwave background that are the photons that decouple, but there is also a cosmic neutrino background that was emitted here once the neutrinos were decoupled from the electrons and positrons. And then this cosmic neutrino background is what we call these cosmological neutrinos. And as I showed you here also on the first day, the neutrinos coming from the Big Bang are really very, very abundant. It's the second particle most abundant just after the photons, okay? So, what about this behavior? So, up to temperatures of the order of the mass of the neutrino, okay, you can put up to 1 electron volt, neutrinos were relativistic. But apart from that, they are not relativistic anymore, and now we know that at least 2 species are non-relativistic today, okay? Because their mass is higher than its energy. So, neutrino cosmology is interesting because these Rayleigh neutrinos are very abundant. This cosmic neutrino background contributes to the radiation at early times and then to matter at late times. And also, I will not discuss this here, but with these cosmological observables can be used to learn about the standard model, but also about doing tests of non-standard neutrino properties that I will not enter into details. Okay? So, here you have how neutrinos were coupled before for temperatures above MeV here. When in MeV, they start free streaming, so they are decoupled from the electrons, and at that point, neutrinos are emitted with this cosmic neutrino background. They are emitted, and then in their emission, in their spectrum, they keep the energy spectrum of a relativistic fermion with this equilibrium form. So they are in equilibrium here. Once they decouple, they conserve this spectrum, and they are emitted with this spectrum here. Okay? Just before continuing, let me just put some expressions in order to explain what I'm going to tell. So we see that this is the distribution for the spectrum of the neutrinos. And then one interesting thing is that there is a difference between the temperature of the neutrinos and the temperature of the photons. We know that the temperature of the photons of the CMB is around 2.7 Kelvin, is the temperature that has been measured, but the temperature of the neutrinos is smaller than this one. And do you know what is smaller? You don't have studied this in cosmology? The point is that the relation between the temperature of the photons and the temperature of the neutrinos obeys this relation. Okay, is lower. Okay, and this is because when neutrinos decouple from the electrons and positrons, okay, once they decouple, they got this temperature, but afterwards, electrons and positrons inject some energy into the spectrum to photons, okay, and then photons were reheated, but already neutrinos were decoupled. So then photons increase their temperature, but not neutrinos. So this is why this is the temperature of the cosmic microwave background, and this is the temperature of the cosmic neutrino background. Okay, this is why there is this difference between the two masses. Okay, and then the thing is that if one considers the relativistic particles and the early universe, one may have that the density radiation of the particles at the early universe, you need to consider the density of photons plus the density of neutrinos. And in that case, you need to take into account that the temperature is different. So when we will discuss about the density radiation of the universe, that is one of the cosmological observables, we will refer to this formula here, where we have taken into account that the temperature of photons and neutrinos is different because of that. Because they decouple before, and then after they decouple, photons got some extra energy from electrons and positons. And then this N effective that we put here is essentially a measurement of the ratio between the density of neutrinos and the density of photons. This is what we called before that it is the number that is around 3. So this is what when we discuss an effective, is not We are not talking about really number of neutrinos, but it is like a ratio of the density radiation in neutrinos versus the density radiation in photons. Okay? So just to be said, so then let me go back to the presentation. So if we talk about the cosmic microwave background, the photons, this is the oldest image that we have from the universe, because before that, so this image was created when the universe was 318 years old. You had this age, because before that, photons were coupled. Photons were not free to stream, to travel. But once they decoupled, then they were emitted, and the cosmic microwave background was found. So then you know that the cosmic microwave background was first discovered by COBE, satellite COBE, in 1982. Then, but you see here the resolution, this measured the anisotropies in the temperature of the universe, so the resolution was not very good. Then it was improved with WMAP in 2013, where they were much more detailed, and finally with Planck, that you can see here all the measurement between the different of temperatures in the different points of the universe. So this is about the CMB. This is the oldest picture we have from the universe. What about the CMB, the cosmic neutrino background? The cosmic neutrino background was created when neutrinos decoupled, and then they were free to travel. So then it was when the universe had 100 seconds. So there was a lot difference of time between one picture and the other. And this is the image we have today. None, because these neutrinos have not been detected. Meaning that they have not been directly observed. We see that this is very hard because the energy is very, very low, but we know of their existence through the effects on the CMB. So we don't have a measurement directly, but if we measure the CMB, the photons, then we get some information on the density of neutrinos. Okay, but what if we want to detect it? Okay, it's already time to detect it. So there are some proposals trying to detect it, but it is really difficult because the energies of those neutrinos of the CNB, cosmic neutrino background, are of the order of 10 to the minus 4 electron volts. So if you compare with solar neutrinos, so it is 10 to 10 orders of, 10 orders of magnitude of difference. So it is extremely hard to measure. But still, there are some proposals based on nuclear beta decay particles. So you remember, this is the standard nuclear beta decay with a neutron, with a nucleus, is stable and decays to another nucleus with a, where it is converted, a neutron from here is converted into a proton, electron, and antineutrino. And this is the spectrum for this process. Okay, this is the spectrum of the electron, and then I will be back to this when I will discuss the neutrino mass searches. In this kind of experiments, you try to measure neutrino mass by measuring the end point. So this is the spectrum of the energy of electrons, and the thing is that if you look to the very end, to the very last part of the spectrum, it makes a difference if neutrinos have a mass or not. If neutrinos don't have a mass, the spectrum will finish here, but if neutrinos are massive, the spectrum will finish a little bit before, because this energy will be used to produce the mass of the neutrino. So the technique to measure neutrino mass at laboratory uses this property, to measure this last part. It's extremely hard, but there are some results that I will discuss later. So here the idea to detect the cosmological neutrinos is to use capture of neutrinos by a beta unstable nucleus. So you will have the cosmological neutrinos from the CNB. The idea is that they are captured by the nucleus. This nucleus is unstable, like that. It experiences beta decay. And then it produces an electron, and then the electron is measured. But the thing is that the signal there is an electron with this energy here. Okay? So if you have this nucleus and you find this emission over there, you will have a signal of an electron capture. It is extremely hard to measure, and there is a project, but there is complicated, but it is a proposal to try to measure it directly. Okay? To do this process, it has been chosen one of these unstable beta nucleus. It has been chosen tritium. tritium. So the process will be that one here. So electron neutrino will be captured by the tritium nucleus that will decay to helium plus electron. And then it will be necessary to measure the energy of this electron. Why tritium? So tritium was selected because this process has a large cross-section compared to other nucleus. Also, tritium has a long lifetime because, okay, if you prepare a detector with a target, you don't expect it would decay before having results. So better you choose a nucleus that has some larger lifetime. The spectrum is less energetic, what allows to measure better this signal. And then you can use some analytical approximations in that case, because it is a rather simple nucleus, okay? So then this project, this nucleus has been selected in the Ptolemai project. Okay, here you have the website if anyone is interested. Technically, it's very complicated how to handle that. So there are some works trying to put the atoms of the tritium in a graphene network. It's very, very complicated. And then the idea would be just to measure here. So this signal will be the signal of the detection of the cosmic, of the neutrino from the cosmic neutrino background. Okay, so here I finished the part of cosmological. Now I need to start for the mass searches. What do you think? We have already, we have been 1 hour. Do you prefer me to continue or we stop for 5 minutes? What do you prefer? What? Stop? Okay, stop. If someone wants to stop, we stop. Okay. So 10 minutes? 10 minutes, okay? Okay. And finish for this week. Okay. Okay, now let's move to the searches for neutrino mass. Okay, so just to remind you a little bit. So I told you the other day that in the standard model, neutrinos are massless, but from oscillations we know that at least 2 of them have a mass because we have measured the 2 mass splittings, so at least 2 of them would be massive. But so we have measured this mass splittings, but not the scale. We don't know the value here from oscillations. Do we have information from other experiments? So this is all the information we have about neutrino masses from experiments. So from oscillations, we have information on that, delta M. From cosmology, we have information on the sum of the masses as they contribute to the density energy of the universe. And then I will discuss here mostly the beta decay kinematics experiments that search for neutrino mass in these experiments, and also neutrinoless double beta decay that have some input on neutrino mass scale, but most of all, they will be the relevant experiments in order to disentangle the nature of the neutrinos if they are Dirac or Majorana. Okay, so from oscillations, we are sensitive to the delta M, so we don't know the scale, but still we can infer something. Why? Because we know that we don't know the mass, but we can infer some limit on the sum of the masses. The sum of the masses, this we saw it before lunch. So in the case of normal ordering, the sum of the masses should be larger than 0.05 because of the atmospheric mass splitting. And in the inverted ordering case, we know the sum of the masses should be, sorry, there is one zero more. It should be 0.1 in the case of inverted ordering because we have here 2 neutrinos with 0.05. It's a typo, I will fix it. Okay, so this is what we know from oscillations. From cosmology, so neutrino masses may affect the cosmological observables. So for instance, since they modify the density radiation of the universe, they can modify the spectrum of the cosmic microwave background. So here you have a plot of this spectrum that is measured by the Planck collaboration and how it can be shifted by different values of the sum of neutrino masses. Okay, taking into account these distortions that may happen due to this sum of the masses, then one can constrain the sum of the masses. And the same happens with large-scale structure formation, because in that case, also the masses of the neutrinos may affect how the large structures are formed in the universe. So at the end, with these two observables, one can constrain, together with the cosmological model, LALDA-CDM cosmological model, one can constrain the sum of the masses to be of order, to be smaller than 0.1, let's say, electron volt. This is the oldest results. Then the new results I showed you before are the ones here, that are the results presented at the Neutrino 2024 conference, that include results not only from Planck, but also from DESI. And in that case, they have very strong, very aggressive bounds, and then they claim that the sum of the masses should be below 0.072 electron volt. So this is but there are some other combinations. This is one of the combinations. It's possible to combine with other measurements from supernova, for instance. And in that case, if you combine it just like it is, you may have problems even with the masses in the normal ordering, because you can go to bounds even lower than here. That will not be compatible with the sum of the mass in the normal ordering. But there are also some papers, like the one I'm citing here, saying that one should be careful when combining different experimental data, because there are some part of the different experiments that might be in tension with other experiments. So then we don't just need to sum up, but we need to think what we are doing, and perhaps there are some measurements that need to be redone. And then in that paper here, they claim that this bound of 0.072 could be relaxed up to 0.11. But we are there. We are in the limit on the sum of the mass of the neutrinos would be below 0.1 electron volt for sure. And this is why this is in so tension with the light sterile hypothesis, as we were seeing this morning. So this is what we learn from cosmology now, but in the future we can learn more. In the future there are some upcoming cosmological probes that will improve the sensitivity to the measurement of the sum of the neutrino masses. And in particular, here I'm listed these new cosmological observatories, Simon's Observatory, LightBird, and CMB S4, that will be able to measure the sum of the masses with very, very good precision. This will be the precision in the measurement of the sum of the masses up to 0.04, 0.042, and then this implies an improvement in a factor of 2 with respect to DESI results. So then if the really neutrino, there are no strange things, there are no non-standard things, and the sum of the masses is just coming from the normal ordering sum of the delta M, these experiments should measure the sum of the neutrino masses, okay? Now, we go to the experiment, to the lab. So we have seen the results from oscillations, the results from cosmology. What about direct neutrino mass experiments? So here there is like historical image of the different experiments that have been trying to measure the masses associated to electron neutrino, tau neutrino, mu neutrino. As you might know by now, it is a mistake saying the mass of the electron neutrino or the mass of the muon neutrino, because one thing are the states with a definite flavor, and another are the states with definite mass. But again, when we talk about the mass of the electron neutrino, we refer to the effective mass correspond to the mass associated with the largest part of the electron neutrino, essentially M1. M1, that is the mass with the large component of Me. Okay. So this is why, in case you might be confused. So this mass of electron neutrino, you should be careful with this definition. Okay, so for the electron neutrino, this process has been used, the tritium that I mentioned before, in this decay, in this beta decay of tritium to helium, electron and neutrino, then measuring the latest part of the spectrum. As I was discussing there, you have this, the spectrum that was, you remember, all started with this spectrum, with the beta spectrum, with Pauli. So then this is the spectrum of the neutrinos. Measuring to this last part here, you can differentiate if neutrinos have a mass or not, because of the different, how the energy is distributed. So in that case, the bounds from this electron neutrino correspond to this line here. So the bound has improved a lot over the years. So this is before 1950. So here is top in the 2000. So the limit has been going down and down and down. And according to this, okay, we will see because there are new results on that. The same can be done for the muon neutrino, measuring the momentum of the muon in the decay of the pion. You have the pion decaying, and then measuring the moment of the muon, then it's possible to infer with the same idea. You measure the momentum, infer the mass associated to the muon neutrino. That it is very large, as you can see here. It was 190 kiloelectron because it is not, let's say, the right experiment to look for that. And also for tau neutrino, one can do the same thing using pions, and one get this bound over here. Okay, this is just historically perspective, the laboratories have been searching for neutrino masses. But the most promising of all of them, you can see the most promising are the measurements with tritium, okay? And then it is what has been done here in these experiments. These tritium beta decay experiments measure the spectrum close to the endpoint. Then, if the mass is 0, the energy of the electron will be like that. If the mass is, for instance, 1 electron volt, the spectrum will be like that, because 1 electron volt will be used to create the mass of the neutrino. Okay, so in that case, the process is sensitive to this effective mass. Okay, what will be the effective neutrino electron mass in the process. Okay, because as I told you, there is no such a thing as the mass of the electron, but this will be the mass of the electron squared. That at the end is a combination of the masses of nu1, nu2, and nu3. So with this in mind, that the masses defined are M1, M2, M3, M beta will be this combination. And this is what is measured in this kind of experiments. So in the 90s, in the first 2000, there was these two experiments, Mainz in Germany and Troitsky in Russia, doing this experiment, and they got a bound on the M beta parameter that should be smaller than 2.2 electron volts. Okay, so still far from what we need according to these cosmological measurements, but it's already an improvement with respect to other experiments done before. So then the idea was to try to pursue this, to continue with this kind of experiments, but with a much more sensitive experiment, studying also the decay of the tritium. So this is the Katrin experiment that is still running. It started in June 2018 in Karlsruhe. And then the idea is the same, the physical idea is the same, having a source of tritium that experiments a beta decay, and then you have the electrons. The difficult part here is measuring the spectrum of the electrons, because you need to measure this last part where, as you can see, this means that there are a few electrons. So this is the distribution of electrons. Most of electrons have this energy, but this energy, only a few of the electrons have them. So then what the experiment needs to do is to amplify the energy of those electrons in order to measure it. And to do this, they have very complex system. They have this spectrometer, but then the idea is to arrive to measure the electrons one by one to measure properly the energy. Okay, so nowadays the best direct bound from Katrin has improved with respect to 2.2 of the other experiments, and is below 0.45 electron volts. So this result was published last year at the IHF conference. So this is the current result from Katrin, but by the end of this year, by the end of 2025, it is expected that Katrin will achieve a sensitivity, okay, it's almost there, but below 0.3 electron volts. So Katrin, unfortunately, cannot go below that. 0.2, 0.3 is the maximum sensitivity it can get, because it's extremely difficult to measure. So in order to get larger sensitivity to neutrino mass at the experiments, there are some other projects that are still on the design proposals. For instance, the Project 8 that use a cold tritium atom trap, okay? Or HOLMES that use another transition sensors using holmium instead of tritium. And ECHO that also uses holmium as another source for beta decay. So these are very nice experiments, and in principle, the sensitivity could go up to 1040 milli-electron volts. So it could be a really improvement, but still, as I tell you, these projects are still ongoing on these preliminary phases. So the last part of the course, I'm going to discuss a little bit about the neutrino-less double beta decay. So first of all, what it is. So we have discussed so far about the standard beta decay, a nucleus that decays to another nucleus, where a neutron is converted to a proton, electron, and antineutrino. And is the one we have just seen is used to search for neutrino mass in tritium experiments. Okay, this is a standard beta decay. What about double beta decay? Double beta decay is a process where, in that case, two neutrons are converted to two protons, two electrons, and two antineutrinos. This is a very rare process in the standard model, but it is allowed, and it has been measured with a half-life of 10 to the 21 years, depends on the nucleus, but it's very rare, and the time life is of this order, so very, very rare. But the one we're going to discuss is even more rare because also we don't know if it is possible or not. Neutrino-less double beta decay will be similar to the double beta decay, but without neutrinos in the final state. Because in principle, this would be possible only for Majorana neutrinos. And the thing is that if neutrinos are Majorana, these two neutrinos will cancel each other, since there will be a particle and antiparticle, and then there will be no neutrinos going out. This is even more rare because it has not been observed. We don't know if it will happen because it's only possible for Majorana neutrinos. It violates lepton number. And since it has not been tested, it has not been seen, we know that the half-life should be larger than 10 to the 26, 10 to the 27 years. So very, very rare. But the importance of this experiment lies in the fact that if observed, one could say that neutrino is a Majorana particle. Okay, so what's the idea? So the idea in that case, in the signal, let's say, is usually the neutrino double beta decay is expected to happen in a nucleus that it also decays through neutrino double beta decay. So to the standard. And this will be the spectrum for the decay to two neutrinos. Okay, the same nucleus will decay to the two neutrinos, and these neutrinos are Majorana. It could also decay to via neutrino-less double beta decay. And in that case, the spectrum will be this little thing here, okay? Because this will be a spectrum, a decay with two particles in the final state, so then the electron will have fixed energy. So then it's very difficult, you can imagine, because you need to differentiate this very small peak from this other spectrum, okay? So you need very good precision on the energy to really measure if its process is there. So in that case, if we want to calculate the rate of this kind of process, so this is the width, the decay width for the neutrino-less double beta decay experiment, and it is essentially calculated in this way, where you have one term that is a phase space term, the kinematical term. Then one of the most difficult part of the calculation is this term here, because it depends on the nuclear matrix elements. And then there are a lot of uncertainties in the determination of the nuclear matrix elements of the different nuclei that may experience this kind of decay. There are several theory groups doing these estimations, but they are using different techniques. Also, there is no agreement. There is a lot of uncertainty on the different values that these nuclear matrix elements can take. So this adds more difficulty to the process. And then this term here is the effective Majorana neutrino mass that also depends on the masses of the neutrino mass eigenstates and on the phases of the mixing matrix. Because you see here, M beta beta is calculated in this way. If you remember, in the case of M beta for the tritium, the value of the M beta was calculated with as the sum of U E I squared Mi. This was for the tritium beta decay. In that case, M beta beta is calculated as the modulus of the sum of this U E I squared Mi squared. Why I'm doing that? Because in that case, you see M beta was not sensitive to the phases of the mixing matrix. But in the case of M beta beta, the phases are here, they don't cancel, you are not doing the modulus there. So then this is why M beta beta is sensitive to the phases, and in particular to the Majorana phases. Okay, it's the place where you can have some sensitivity on the Majorana phases of the mixing matrix. Okay, so how to explain in theory this kind of process? So usually the Feynman diagram for this process is pictured here. So you have in terms of the quarks involved, so you have this d quark interact with a W and produce the pair electron neutrino, and the other here, and these two neutrinos cancel each other with a Majorana mass term, okay, and then they are not emitted. This is the Feynman diagram. If you do the calculation, this is a dimension 9 operator, okay? And then a very nice result is that if neutronless double beta decay happens, okay, if this process happens, if this is a Feynman diagram that is valid, then you can take this one and connect different legs of the Feynman diagrams, and then you can build this other one here. And this is nothing but a Majorana mass for the neutrinos. Okay, meaning that if neutronless double beta decay is observed, then essentially directly you know that neutrinos will get a contribution from a Majorana mass term. Okay, they are directly related. So this is the so-called black box theorem, because independently of what you have here, if you observe neutronless double beta decay, you will get a neutrino, a Majorana mass term for the neutrinos. Okay. One should be careful with this point because this is not on the both sides, because Majorana neutrino mass term is not the only mechanism that can lead to neutronless double beta decay. So there are new physics models where you may have also some predictions for neutronless double beta decay. Okay, so this term cannot come only from Majorana mass term, but also from other mechanisms with left-right symmetric models, very BSM models. Okay, only when sorry, again, I think because I was not using that. The thing is that, yeah, only when the only source of neutronless double beta decay is due to the neutrino mass, then you can do the connection between the width of the process and the mass. So one should be careful when extracting the information from the experimental results. But in principle, observing the neutronless double beta decay connects with a Majorana mass. And this is the last one. So then the thing is that from different neutronless double beta decay, of course, this process has not been observed yet. There are many experiments trying to look for this, as for instance, Cuore, EXO, Gerda, Kamlan-Sen, many experiments, but so far, none of them has found a signal of this process. This is a plot showing you the value of the M beta beta as a function of the lightest mass. So you remember this formula here. So the size of the band corresponds to the other parameters that you are marginalizing. So this M beta beta depends on M1, but also M2, M3, and the mixing angles. So then the width of the band is because all the other parameters. So then these are the expectations for normal ordering in red and for inverted ordering in green. There is a region where both orderings give you more or less the same prediction, that is called the degenerate spectrum. So nowadays the experiments, if they don't see a signal, they put a bound on M beta beta, so excluding everything above. So these lines correspond to the different values that are excluded from the experiments. So you can see that now current limits are over here. So they are already exploring the inverted ordering part. And yeah, in principle, the next generation of experiments are supposed to analyze, to be sensitive to all this part of the inverted ordering. So then if nothing is found, it could be concluded that either neutrinos are not Majorana, or in case they are Majorana, inverted ordering is not the right ordering. Okay, so then these are the bounds for the different experiments, and that's it from my side. So let me know if you have any question or you are so tired after this week. Okay. So, any question? It's for the sum. Cosmology is only sensitive to the sum of the masses. Yes. Yes, yes. Yes. This is here is the bound with the lightest neutrino mass. It is M1 for normal, M3 for inverted, and then the M beta beta. But yeah, what makes sense talking about mass is the mass of the eigenstates. So this is why when we discuss about the mass of the electron neutrino, is this. The mass of the electron neutrino is the one is proved at tritium experiments that at the end is a combination of the masses of all the other masses. Any other question? Of the? I cannot understand, sorry. Yes? You want me to explain the method to detect astrophysical neutrinos? Okay, so the thing in IceCube, for instance, so the idea you cannot measure the neutrino because it's a neutral particle and then there is no possibility. So what happens is that you expect, usually these experiments look, either Chem3net or IceCube, look for the neutrinos coming from below. This is the Earth, this is the experiment, so you look for the neutrinos coming from below. Why? Because if you look for neutrinos coming from above, something else can come. So if you look to neutrinos coming from below, you are sure that all the particles that are not neutrinos will be filtered by the Earth, and only neutrinos will arrive here. Okay, so this is one point. Then, for instance, in the Chem3net, you have the experiment is at the bottom of the sea. So then what happens there, the detection process is that a neutrino, so you have here, for instance, the sea, a neutrino arrives to the sea, and then via charge current, you have a muon neutrino, produces a muon, and then the muon enters into the sea or into the ice, okay? And then this muon has relativistic velocities. So its velocity, its speed in the sea or in the ice is larger than the speed of the light in this medium. The speed of the muon, the speed of the electron is larger than the speed of the light in the medium. Then, due to this thing that the velocity of the muon is larger than the velocity of light, but in the medium, what happens is that the muon emits a radiation that is the Cherenkov radiation. It emits a cone of light as it travels, as the moon is traveling, emits this radiation, and then this radiation is the one is detected by the photomultipliers of the experiments. Okay? Welcome. Any other question? Okay, so thanks a lot. You have been very kind, very nice. So I hope you will enjoy the weekend and you will have a nice week also in the next one. Okay, thank you.